When 7.0 released, there was one thing I wanted to know about Odette. How much damage can I make her do? Because as it turns out, her elemental skill can deal one absolutely massive hit. And when I saw what kind of numbers people were already getting out of it, I had a terrible idea. I wanted to hit 1 million damage with just one skill. And I wanted to do it with my totally F2P C0R0 Odette. Who I absolutely did not spend 100 bucks on after losing my 50-50. So over the next 2 days, I was going to throw everything I had at her, completely butcher the builds of several of my innocent characters, and abuse every buff I could get my hands on. All for the very noble purpose of turning this elegant ballerina into a weapon of mass destruction. Unfortunately, before I could do any of that, I needed some flowers. Now, the only problem was that Hoyo apparently wasn't too keen on me getting those flowers, because access to basically all of Odette's upgrade materials was locked behind a good chunk of Act 1 of the 7.0 Archon quest. So, with no other choice, I started my journey into Snezhnaya. And not even 5 minutes later, I got blasted down a cliff and was greeted by Piero, the man with the second most aura in the game. The first place obviously goes to the GOAT, Pulcinella. I mean, that guy literally has impact frames when he opens doors. How can you compete with that? Anyway, shortly after that, we found our very own train. Only to crash it about 5 seconds later. But hey, at least I was finally in Snezhnaya, which meant I could go grab those flowers. Or so I thought. Because as it turns out, most of them were on the other side of the map, and since the concept of global warming has seemingly not reached Snezhnaya yet, I couldn't make it 5 meters without freezing to death. Which simply meant that before I could collect anything, I first had to repair the train. That eventually led me to join forces with Alyosha, and we cleansed together the town of its local Discord moderator. And before we could set off to the capital, Alyosha tried to scare me with some ominous local folktale. Which doesn't work on me, buddy. I'm German. We've been practicing trauma maxing since childhood with our bedtime stories. Anyway, with the train running, it was then time to finally head to my destination. Except, of course not, the train gets attacked by some random purple slime, which transports us to the Shadow Realm, where I suddenly have to win a round of Fortnite against Ghost Fatui soldiers. Now, quick question at this point. Developers, are you guys okay? Anyway, after all of that, I could finally pick up some stupid flowers. And with that, I was able to level my Odette to 80. Now, while farming for some more boss materials, I wanted to go for a quick first damage check to see where we were standing. Okay, alright, let's give this a first shot and let us find out for how much Odette is already hitting. I don't expect much here. She is... Okay, 200k! And that was without a burst. 200k isn't too bad, I think. Yeah, I might not have let it on while I was recording this, but at this point I was getting a little bit worried that my goal might not actually be possible. Don't get me wrong, 200,000 damage is already pretty impressive for a level 80 Odette. But it is also very much not 1 million. So for now, I just had to trust that the damage would come once I actually finished building mine. And the first thing I wanted to improve were her artifacts. There was a brand new artifact set made specifically for Stellar Conduct teams, so I headed straight to the new domain and started throwing my resin at it. Now, normally this would be the part of the video where I would show you all the amazing artifacts I got. If I had any. Seriously, I got basically nothing. Which thankfully wasn't a complete disaster because I wasn't actually planning on giving the new set to Odette anyway. Although, it would have been nice to get at least something Hoyoverse. You see, the new set is primarily supportive, buffing the stellar reaction damage of the entire team. But we don't care about the entire team, we care about Odette. So instead, I wanted her to use the disenchant set to push her personal damage as high as possible, which meant the new set ended up going to Yae. This is basically the exact opposite of what you would normally want to do. Yae generally deals more damage than Odette, so she would usually be the better character to put on a DPS set. But this video isn't about Yae, and I'm on a quest to turn a ballerina into a nuclear weapon, so sorry Yae, you have to hold on to this abysmal HP set. With the artifact sorted, there was one more thing I wanted to upgrade. Up until now, Odette has been using Finale of the Deep, which is fine, but I thought we could do better. After weighing up my options, I decided to give her the Traveler Sword. She can't really make use of its passive, but with its high base attack and decent amount of crit, it still makes for a really good stat stick. The new craftable weapon probably would have been a slightly better option for what I was trying to do, but there was just one small problem. I was completely out of fragile resin, and since I had still talents that needed to be leveled, I figured whatever resin I had left was much better spent there than on farming materials for a new weapon. Especially because, on the other side, upgrading the Traveler Sword is basically free. You just have to visit all of the statues in Snezhnaya and hit them with the Cryo Traveler. Now, by the time I had finished all of this, it was getting pretty late, and without any resin left, there also wasn't much I could do. So I decided to call it a day. But before logging off, I wanted to do one last damage test to see how much all of these changes had actually helped. Okay, so before I go to bed, let's do one quick test run here again, and let's see what the upgrades changed. Hey, 400,000! That's decent. Okay, we essentially doubled our damage with all the upgrades. That's a decent start. Okay, I'm starting to believe. Still a long way to go though. The next day started with me completing the Archon quest in order to be able to get the additional materials for Odette, which allowed me to fully level her to 90. I also tried to get my hands on as much talent books as possible to be able to level both her skill and burst as far as I could. This also meant that I needed a ton of the new upgrade materials, which came at a detriment to the local Fae population. Hey, look at all those Faes back there using their wings to fly. Surely this means that Vesna will use her wings instead of a glider, right? Right? Just like all the others. Now, some of you might be wondering why we even want to level the burst in the first place. After all, a lot of guides out there recommend to not even use the burst in your rotation, since it's a DPS loss because of its long animation. However, the DPS we care about is not damage per second, but rather damage per screenshot. This means that the stellar damage buff Odette gives herself with the burst is greatly appreciated in order to further increase the skill's big hit. Alright, so far so good. I have essentially maxed out Odette at this point, or well, at least to the best of my broke-ass abilities. However, before I was going to do another damage test, I wanted to also build a proper team, because so far, all of the testing I did was done using my standard Sandrone team. And well, Sandrone doesn't really help Odette in dealing more damage. So I wanted to replace her with another Stellar Conduct support. Obviously, my first thought was Beidou, as I'm legally required to as a Beidou main. Unfortunately, I have to admit that she isn't the best choice here. So I ended up with Diona, who with her C6 can provide another Stellar Conduct damage buff, as well as 200 Elemental Mastery. I also equipped her with Noblesse to get another attack percent buff for Odette, alongside the tenacity of the Minlith set as Corvier was holding. Now, with all these changes being done, it was then time for another damage test. Now, clearly we made some pretty decent progress. I mean, at this point, Odette was already hitting harder with one button than most of the characters on my account managed in an entire rotation. But 670,000 is still very much not 1 million, and honestly, I was starting to run out of things I could improve. Sure, there were still some smaller optimizations left. I could use buff food, maybe squeeze out a few more talent levels, or pray to the artifacts god for better pieces. But none of that was going to magically give me another 330,000. If I actually wanted to reach 1 million, I needed to make another big change. So I started researching, and eventually I managed to find something that might actually give me the boost I needed. Because there was one character on the team who, for what I was trying to do, felt a little underwhelming, as Corvier. Now, normally she's a pretty good option, because she provides resistant shredding, which is otherwise pretty difficult to get. But apart from that, she wasn't really doing much in order to increase Odette's damage directly. Which got me thinking, what if I just fought an enemy that already had lowered resistances? That would make Escovier's biggest contribution significantly less important and allow me to replace her with someone who could buff Odette's damage even further. And conveniently, there happens to be a boss in Snezhnaya that does exactly that. So, Escovier was out and Chi-Chi was back in. Because not only can she hold tenacity just like Escovier, she also gives Odette another Stellar Conduct damage bonus. Which meant it was time for another test. Okay, let's find out and see how much damage changes when we fight this enemy. It should be decent bit higher, we have to first break the shield. but it should go down during the setup. And burst. Oh, we almost did it! The HP bar was just gone. Okay, we are super close. We can get to 1 million. I just need to use Barfoot, and I think we can get there. Now that I had come this far, I didn't just want to barely scrape past 1 million. I wanted to see how stupid we could make this. And there was one more trick I had picked up doing my research. Thrilling Tales on Yae Miko. Yeah, I clearly did not violate her enough already with those trash artifact pieces I gave her, so this was the next step. I had actually considered Thrilling Tales earlier, but pretty much immediately dismissed it because Yae is the only Electro character on this team, and I needed her to generate enough stellar conduct sacks, so I basically had to start a rotation with her. Which means the Thrilling Tales buff would activate way too early and never actually reach Odette. So I figured it just wouldn't work. However, people whose brain cell count isn't in the single digits like mine had apparently already solved this problem. If you simply activate Thrilling Tales before starting the fight so that it goes on cooldown, then during the actual setup you swap back to Yae right before Odette, Thrilling Tales comes off cooldown, you swap back to Odette, and suddenly she gets another massive attack buff. But with that last and final change, it was now time to see if I actually achieved my goal. Okay, so this has to be the run. I don't have any of Escoffier's buff foods left. I tried to get more, I didn't get any. So this is essentially the run. If this fails, we have no more attempts. So it counts. Okay, let's make sure to get all the setups in, all the buffs going. Swap to Yae. Get some positional stacks. Burst. And let's go. Are you serious? 1.2 million damage. Holy crap. Holy crap. Okay, yeah, I think we can officially say that we achieved my goal. And the funny thing is, this attempt wasn't even perfect. I didn't manage to reach the maximum amount of stellar stacks, so I'm pretty sure this exact setup could go even higher. But I was happy. Also, quick credit where it's due, a lot of the optimizations I used towards the end came from Shadow GG's Odette video. They managed to push her all the way to around 1.9 million damage in a single hit, although that was with things like Odette's signature weapon, C6 Alyosha, and C6 Chi-Chi, which are all things that, unfortunately, I do not have lying around. So, unless somebody would like to sponsor my questionable financial decisions, 1.2 million is where we are calling it. I'm pretty happy with that. As for Odette herself, I've honestly had a lot of fun with her. Obviously, this entire setup is completely ridiculous, and you should probably not build your team around maximizing one screenshot number, but I quite like her gameplay. I like how she fits into stellar conduct teams, and I'm definitely glad I decided to pull her. But I'm curious about what you guys think. Did you pull Odette? And if you did, how have your pulls and your builds been going? Let me know down in the comments, and with that, until next time, bye.